This is not just a story. This is revenge.
I wasn't supposed to be there. At least, that's how my family acted when I pulled into the parking lot. The invitation had my name on it, the date, the hotel. Everything, still. The second I stepped out of my car, I saw the looks. You know the kind. The kind that starts before a single word is spoken. I shut off the engine and sat there for a second. Just looking. Rows of luxury SUVs, a couple of imported sports cars. My cousin Ethan's brand new black Escalade parked right in front of the entrance like he owned the place. And then there was my car. A 10-year-old silver Camry with a cracked phone mount hanging from the dashboard. Nothing special. Honestly, it was exactly the kind of car I'd always driven. Reliable, paid off. No monthly payment. I grabbed the overnight bag from the passenger seat. The zipper was broken. I'd been meaning to replace it for months. Never got around to it. As soon as I started walking toward the hotel entrance, I heard laughter. Not loud. Not yet. Just enough. My cousin Brooke spotted me first. Well, look who made it. A few heads turned, then more. The reunion hadn't officially started. Most of the family was gathered outside near the valet area, talking, showing off, comparing watches and vacation photos like they always did. I should probably explain something. My family has money, not billionaire money, not private jet money, but enough money that everyone talks about it. Enough money that every conversation somehow turns into investments, lake houses, or business deals. And for most of my life, I was the disappointment. Not because I'd done anything terrible. I didn't go to jail. I wasn't addicted to anything. I wasn't irresponsible. I just didn't play the game. I worked, paid my bills, lived quietly. Apparently that was a problem. Still driving that thing? Ethan asked. He nodded toward my car. A few people laughed. I shrugged. It gets me where I need to go. That got another laugh. I smiled. Not because it was funny, because arguing never helped. I learned that years ago. Especially with family. My Aunt Linda walked over and gave me a quick hug, one of those half hugs people give when they're distracted. Then she stepped back and looked around. Did you come alone? There it was. The question. I knew it was coming. Yeah, oh, she nodded. That little disappointed nod. The one people don't realize they're doing. My ex-fiancé had left almost 2 years earlier. Most of the family still treated it like evidence. Proof that something must be wrong with me. Nobody said it directly. They didn't have to. I could hear it between the lines. Still single. Still driving that car. Still renting. Still Ethan's favorite topic whenever he needed an audience. I checked my phone. No new messages. The screen was cracked in one corner. Another thing Ethan noticed immediately. Dude, he laughed. Do you own anything that was made this decade? More laughter. I looked around. Nobody stopped him. Nobody ever did. For a second, I thought about leaving. Seriously, just turning around. Getting back in the Camry, driving home, ordering pizza, watching a game. Anything sounded better than spending an entire weekend being reminded where I ranked in the family hierarchy. Then I remembered my grandfather. And I stayed. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, had been gone for 3 years. But somehow, he still felt present, especially at family events. His photo was everywhere, his stories, his business, his legacy. Everybody talked about him. The funny thing was, nobody talked about the last conversation I ever had with him. Because nobody knew about it. Not even me. Not really. Not yet. At the time, I thought it was just an old man talking. Now I know it wasn't. Not even close. The hotel doors opened. People started heading inside. The reunion officially began. I followed the crowd into the lobby. And that's when something happened. Something small. At least it seemed small at the time. A hotel employee standing behind the front desk looked up. His eyes landed on me. Then he froze. Just for a second. I almost missed it. He looked confused. Then surprised. Then nervous, like he'd just seen someone he wasn't expecting to see. I kept walking. The moment passed. Or at least I thought it did. I had no idea that before the weekend was over, half my family would be staring at me in complete silence. And the thing they thought they knew about our family was about to fall apart. The first few hours were exactly what I expected. Too much food, too many conversations I didn't want to have, and somehow not enough coffee. The reunion ballroom sat on the second floor of the hotel. Big windows, stone fireplace, family photos displayed on easels near the entrance. Somebody had spent a lot of money putting the whole thing together. Honestly, it looked more like a wedding than a reunion. I grabbed a paper cup of coffee from the refreshment table. It was already lukewarm, still drank it. I found an empty chair near the back of the room and stayed there. That was usually my strategy, stay out of the spotlight. Weekend goes faster. A few cousins came by, small talk. Work, sports, weather, the usual, nothing terrible, nothing memorable. For a little while, things actually felt normal. Then Ethan sat down across from me. Of course he did. He had a beer in one hand, that grin in the other. "You still working for that construction company?" I nodded. "Yep," he leaned back. Damn, I knew what was coming. He wasn't asking. He was performing. There was a difference. I figured by now you'd have started your own thing. A couple relatives nearby looked over. Listening, I took another sip of coffee. Maybe someday, he repeated. Then laughed, like I'd just said something ridiculous. A few people joined in. Not everyone. Just enough. I looked out the window. The parking lot stretched toward the lake behind the hotel. Boats moved slowly across the water. The weather was perfect. Blue sky, warm breeze. I remember thinking how strange it was. A beautiful day, and somehow I still felt trapped. Then Ethan changed the subject. Or at least I thought he did. "You know what's funny?" I didn't answer. He continued anyway. "Grandpa always thought you were going to be the successful one." The room got quieter, not silent, but quieter. That caught people's attention. I looked at him for the first time all day. Did he? Oh yeah, he laughed. Man, he was wrong. A few people looked uncomfortable. Good, they should have. But nobody said anything. Nobody ever said anything. I stood up, tossed the empty coffee cup, and walked away. Not because I was angry, actually I was, but mostly because I was tired. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I headed toward the lobby. Needed air, needed distance, needed 5 minutes without Ethan's voice. The lobby was mostly empty. A few guests checked in near the front desk. A family with 2 little kids rolled suitcases toward the elevators. For the first time all day, it was quiet. I sat down in one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. Pulled out my phone, scrolled aimlessly, didn't read a single thing. Then I heard footsteps. Approaching fast, I looked up. A man in a navy suit was walking directly toward me. Mid-50s. Professional, confident, hotel management type. At first I assumed he was headed somewhere else. Then he stopped, right in front of me. His expression changed, almost like relief. "Mr. Hayes?" I blinked. "Yeah." He extended his hand immediately. "Good to finally meet you." For a second, I honestly thought he had the wrong person. I stood and shook his hand. "Sorry, have we met?" No, his answer came too quickly, like he'd prepared it. "My name's Robert Grayson, General Manager." I nodded, still confused. He seemed even more confused, not by me, by something else, something behind the scenes, something he expected to happen differently. His eyes drifted toward the ballroom. Then back to me. "Everything okay so far?" "Yeah, good," he hesitated. Then added, "If you need anything at all, please let me know personally." Personally, strange choice of word. I smiled politely. Thanks. He looked like he wanted to say more. Instead, he stopped himself. Enjoy the reunion, Mr. Hayes. Then he walked away. Just like that. I stood there watching him disappear around the corner, trying to make sense of the interaction. Nothing about it felt normal. Maybe he knew my grandfather. That was my first guess. Grandpa knew everyone. Business owners, city officials, bank presidents, half the county probably. Maybe that was it. Simple explanation. Except, 20 minutes later, something happened that made that explanation fall apart. I returned to the ballroom. Dinner was being served. People were finding seats. The reunion organizers had arranged family tables. I found my name card near the far end of the room. Not surprising. I usually ended up at the edge of things. I sat down. The waiter poured water. A basket of bread arrived. Conversations started again. Then the ballroom doors opened. Robert Grayson walked inside. The general manager. He wasn't supposed to be there, at least not during dinner. Yet there he was, carrying a dark leather folder, walking directly toward our table. My stomach tightened. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe because everyone could see him coming. The conversations around us started slowing down. People noticed. Managers don't usually interrupt family dinners, especially not at expensive hotels. Robert stopped beside me. Not Ethan, not Aunt Linda, not the reunion organizer. Me, the room had gone strangely quiet. He looked down at the seating card, then at me, almost like he was verifying something. Again, Mr. Hayes, I nodded. He handed me the folder. These were left for you. The room froze. Every conversation stopped. Every eye landed on me. I looked down. The folder felt old. Heavy. Inside was a sealed envelope, cream-colored. My name written across the front, not printed. Handwritten. I knew that handwriting immediately. My heart skipped, just once. Then again, because there was only one person who wrote like that. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, and he'd been dead for 3 years. The room suddenly felt a lot smaller. Ethan leaned forward. What is that? I didn't answer. Honestly, I couldn't. Because at that moment, I wasn't looking at Ethan. I wasn't looking at anyone. I was staring at the envelope and trying to understand how something written by a dead man had just found its way into my hands. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Not me, not Ethan, not the manager. Nobody. The only sound in the room was silverware clinking against plates somewhere across the ballroom. I stared at the envelope. My grandfather's handwriting. No question. I'd seen birthday cards, Christmas cards, little notes he'd leave on the kitchen counter. Same handwriting, same sharp letters, same way he crossed the letter T. My hands felt strangely heavy. Ethan broke the silence first. Well, I looked up. What? Aren't you going to open it? A few people laughed nervously. Not because it was funny, because everyone was uncomfortable. The manager still stood there, waiting, almost like he was supposed to witness this. I looked at him. Do you know what this is? His expression tightened. Unfortunately, sir, I was only instructed to deliver it. Instructed by who? A pause. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Your grandfather. The room went completely silent. No laughter, no whispers, nothing. Ethan frowned. That's impossible. The manager nodded. I understand how that sounds. Yeah, so did I. Because Walter Hayes had been buried 3 years ago. I was there. I carried the casket. I watched the dirt hit the top of it. So what exactly was happening? The manager reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded document. This might help explain. He handed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. The paper looked old, not ancient, but old enough. The signature at the bottom hit me immediately. Walter Hayes. My grandfather. No doubt about it. The document wasn't a letter. It was an instruction. A legal instruction. Dated almost 4 years earlier. The language was formal. Simple, direct. If a certain set of conditions were met, a sealed envelope was to be delivered to me personally during the next Hayes family reunion held at Lakeside Grand Resort. I read that sentence 3 times. Lakeside Grand Resort. This hotel. This exact building. A strange feeling settled in my chest, like I had accidentally stepped into a story that had started years ago. Before I even knew it existed, Ethan stood up. "Let me see that." No, the answer came out before I even thought about it. A few heads turned. Even I was surprised. I wasn't usually confrontational. But something about this felt personal. Very personal. Ethan sat back down, clearly annoyed. The manager nodded slightly, almost approving. Then he excused himself and left. The second he disappeared through the ballroom doors, the questions started. What does it say? Why would Grandpa do that? Is it money? Is it a will thing? Everyone suddenly cared. Funny how that works. 5 minutes earlier, I was invisible. Now I was the most interesting person in the room. I slid the envelope into the folder, still unopened, and finished dinner. Or at least I pretended to. I don't remember tasting anything. Not the steak, not the potatoes, not the dessert. Nothing. My brain was somewhere else. Back 3 years, back to Grandpa, back to the last conversation we ever had. A conversation I hadn't thought about in a long time. Not because it wasn't important, because it never made sense, at least not until now. It happened 6 months before he died. I was helping him clean out his garage. One of those old detached garages behind his house, the kind that smells like motor oil, dust, and memories. He was sitting on a stool sorting through boxes. I was carrying things to a donation pile. At one point he stopped, looked at me, and said something strange. "You know what the problem with this family is?" I laughed. "Which problem?" He smiled, then pointed toward the house. "They confuse ownership with entitlement." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. Honestly, I forgot about it 5 minutes later. Now I couldn't stop hearing it. Ownership, entitlement, the words kept replaying in my head. Dinner finally ended. People started heading toward the outdoor patio overlooking the lake. The sun was beginning to set. Orange reflections danced across the water. It should have been relaxing. Instead, it felt like everyone was watching me. Because they were. Everywhere I turned, someone looked away too quickly. Whispers followed me. Questions floated through conversations. Nobody knew what was inside the envelope, including me, and somehow that made it worse. I found a quiet corner near the edge of the property. Away from everyone, away from Ethan, away from the speculation. The evening breeze felt cool against my face. I sat down on a wooden bench overlooking the lake. Then finally, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter and a brass key. The key looked old, heavy, one of those keys people don't really use anymore. No label, no explanation, just a key. I unfolded the letter. The first line hit me immediately. "Nathan, if you're reading this, it means the reunion happened exactly where I expected it would." I stopped. Read it again. "Nathan, my grandfather always used my full name. Nobody else did, just him." My chest tightened. I kept reading. Most people spend their lives looking at what belongs to someone else. Very few take the time to learn what belongs to them. By now, some members of our family have probably started asking questions. Let them. They've ignored the right questions for years. I stared at the page. The handwriting felt alive somehow, like he was sitting across from me, still giving advice, still speaking in riddles. The next paragraph was even stranger. "Inside this property is something I've been protecting for over 20 years. It was never meant for the loudest member of the family, nor the richest, nor the most ambitious. It was meant for the one person who never asked for it." My pulse quickened. I looked up from the letter. The hotel lights reflected off the lake. Families laughed somewhere behind me. Music played softly from the patio. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. I looked back down. The final line was short, almost frustratingly short. The key opens the first door, not the last one. Grandpa, that was it. No explanation, no answers, no location, nothing, just a key. And a mystery. I sat there for several minutes, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Then a shadow appeared beside the bench. I looked up. It was Robert Grayson, the hotel manager. Again, this time his expression was different, more serious, less professional, almost cautious, like he knew something he wasn't sure he should say. He looked at the key in my hand, then at the letter, and for the first time all evening, he asked a question. Did he tell you about the boathouse? My heart skipped just once. Because something in his voice told me the answer mattered, and because deep down, I already knew. The key wasn't for the hotel, it was for something else, something Grandpa had hidden, and somehow that secret had been waiting here all along. I stood up so fast the bench scraped against the concrete. The boathouse? Robert nodded, then immediately looked back toward the patio, like he was making sure nobody had followed him. The reunion crowd was still gathered near the water. Music, laughter, drinks, nobody seemed interested in us. At least not yet. Come with me, he said quietly. I looked at the letter again, then the key, then him. A smarter person probably would have asked more questions. I didn't. Something told me I'd been asking the wrong questions all day anyway. We started walking. The path wrapped around the lake behind the hotel. The further we went, the quieter it got. The sounds of the reunion faded behind us. Soon it was just crickets. Water, footsteps, the boathouse appeared through the trees about 5 minutes later. Small, weathered, dark green paint peeling off the walls. Nothing impressive. Honestly, it looked forgotten, like part of the property nobody bothered maintaining anymore. Robert stopped near the entrance. Here, I looked at the old brass lock, then at the key in my hand. You've never opened it? He shook his head. No, why not? His answer came immediately. Because Walter Hayes told me not to. That sent a chill through me. My grandfather had been dead for 3 years, and somehow people were still following his instructions. I stepped forward, inserted the key. The lock clicked, just like that. No resistance, no struggle. Like it had been waiting. The wooden door creaked open. The smell hit first. Dust, old paper, lake water, the smell of something untouched. Robert reached inside and flipped on a light. A single bulb flickered overhead. The room wasn't empty, not even close. There were shelves, boxes, file cabinets, old photographs, and in the center, a wooden desk. My stomach tightened, because sitting on top of that desk was another envelope. My name was written across it, Nathan Hayes. Same handwriting. Grandpa, again, I walked toward it slowly, almost afraid to touch it. Robert stayed near the doorway. Silent, watching, I picked up the envelope, opened it carefully. Inside was a single note, short, very short. If you're here, you're asking the right questions. The records are underneath. That was it. No explanation, no answers, just another puzzle. I looked underneath the desk. At first I didn't see anything. Then I noticed a small metal latch, hidden beneath the frame. I pulled it. A compartment slid open, and suddenly everything changed. Inside were folders, dozens of them, neatly organized, labeled by year. Bank statements, property records, tax documents, legal agreements. I pulled out the first folder. The date caught my attention immediately. 22 years earlier, long before I graduated high school, long before Grandpa died, long before any of this, I opened it and stared. For several seconds, I honestly didn't understand what I was looking at. The documents referenced the resort, this resort, Lakeside Grand, the hotel, the marina, the conference center, all of it, property records, ownership records, financial statements. My brain immediately jumped to a conclusion. The obvious one. The conclusion everyone watching this story would probably jump to. Grandpa owned the hotel. I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, something that made sense. Except, 5 minutes later, that theory completely fell apart. Because the next folder told a very different story. The property wasn't owned by Grandpa. Never had been. I checked again. Same result, different years, different documents, same answer. The resort belonged to someone else entirely. A company, a trust, a name I'd never heard before. North Shore Legacy Trust. I frowned. What is this? Robert finally spoke. I was wondering when you'd get there. I looked up. You know about this? A little. A little? He nodded. Not enough to understand it. Just enough to know Walter spent years protecting it. Protecting what? That question kept bouncing around my head. I opened another folder, then another, then another. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. The trust owned far more than the resort. Commercial buildings, rental properties, land holdings, investment accounts, pieces of businesses, millions of dollars worth of assets, maybe more. And yet I'd never heard of it. Not once, not ever. Then I found something else, a photograph. Old, probably 20 years old. The edges had yellowed with age. There were 4 people standing together. Grandpa, a lawyer, a woman I didn't recognize, and me. I froze. I couldn't have been older than 13, maybe 14. Baseball cap, oversized t-shirt, awkward teenager smile, the kind every kid regrets later. I stared at the photo, confused. Why would I be in this picture? Why would Grandpa keep it here? Then I flipped it over, and my pulse immediately sped up. There was handwriting on the back. Same handwriting, Walter Hayes. The first witness. I read it twice. Then a third time. The first witness. Not beneficiary, not owner. Witness. What did that even mean? Before I could think further, footsteps echoed outside. Fast footsteps. Multiple. Robert heard them too. His head snapped toward the door. The sound got closer. Crunching gravel, voices, my stomach dropped. Because I recognized one of them instantly. Ethan, of course, I should have known. The moment the family realized something important was happening, Ethan wasn't going to stay away. The door swung open. 3 people stepped inside. Ethan, Aunt Linda, and my cousin Brooke. All staring directly at the desk, at the folders, at the documents, at me. Nobody spoke for a second. Then Ethan laughed, not because something was funny, because he thought he'd figured it out. Seriously? He shook his head. This is what all the mystery is about? I frowned. What are you talking about? He pointed toward the documents. The hotel. Then he laughed again. A confident laugh. The kind people make when they're absolutely certain they're right. You found paperwork showing Grandpa owned the place. I looked at him, then at the folders, then back at him, and for the first time all weekend I smiled. Not because I knew the answer, because I knew he was wrong. The hotel wasn't the secret, not even close. And somewhere inside those records was something much bigger. Something Grandpa had spent 20 years hiding, something important enough to leave behind clues, something important enough to bring all of us here. And whatever it was, we still hadn't found it. Ethan walked straight to the desk. Didn't ask, didn't hesitate, just started grabbing folders. Same way he'd always approached life, as if everything belonged to him until somebody physically stopped him. Careful, Robert said. Ethan ignored him. Aunt Linda stepped closer. Brooke moved beside her. All 3 of them started scanning documents, looking for numbers, looking for ownership percentages, looking for anything they could use to answer the question everyone suddenly cared about. Who gets what? Funny, my grandfather hadn't even been mentioned for the last 20 minutes. Just the money, just the assets, just the possibility of ownership. And for some reason, that made me sad. I picked up the photograph again, the one with Grandpa, the lawyer, the unknown woman, and me, The first witness. I couldn't stop looking at it. Something about those words bothered me. Witness to what? Before I could think further, Robert suddenly cleared his throat. I think there's one folder you should see. Everyone looked up. He pointed toward the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet, locked, different from the others. Older, heavier, I walked over, tried the brass key. Nothing, wrong lock. Ethan smirked. Guess the mystery ends there. Then he reached into the drawer beneath it and froze. Just froze. For a second, I thought he'd found something important. Instead, he slowly pulled out a small wooden box, about the size of a cigar case. Dark walnut, smooth edges, very old. There was a note attached to the lid. 3 names, only 3. Nathan, Margaret, Daniel. I frowned. Nathan was me. Margaret was my aunt. Daniel was Grandpa's attorney. The attorney from the photograph. My stomach tightened because Daniel Reeves wasn't dead. I'd seen him at the funeral 3 years ago, and unless something had changed recently, he was still alive. Ethan looked annoyed. Why aren't our names on here? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Aunt Linda looked even more uncomfortable. Margaret, her name was on the box, and judging by the expression on her face, she hadn't expected that, not at all. Robert checked his watch, then looked toward the lake. He should be here soon. I stared at him. Who? The third name. Daniel, almost on cue, headlights appeared through the boathouse window. A black sedan rolled down the gravel road. The engine stopped, a car door opened, then another. Footsteps, slow, steady, purposeful. The room suddenly felt smaller. The door opened, and an older man stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. Gray hair, wire-frame glasses, perfect posture. Late 60s maybe, possibly older. I recognized him immediately. Daniel Reeves, Grandpa's attorney, the last person I expected to see that night. Daniel looked around the room, at me, at Aunt Linda, at Ethan, at the documents. Then he sighed, a long sigh. The kind people make when they've been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Well, he said, I suppose Walter finally got his reunion. Nobody laughed. Daniel set the briefcase on the desk, then looked directly at me. Nathan, I nodded. He smiled soft. You look exactly like your grandfather when you're confused. For some reason, that hit harder than it should have. Maybe because I hadn't heard anyone compare me to Grandpa in years. Daniel looked at the wooden box, then at Aunt Linda. Margaret, she nodded, nervous, more nervous than I'd ever seen her. Then Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small brass key. Not my key. Different key, different shape, different purpose. Without saying a word, he unlocked the wooden box. The lid opened. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes, one addressed to me, one to Margaret, one to Daniel himself. Nobody else's name appeared. Not Ethan, not Brooke, not any of the cousins. Nobody. Ethan immediately spoke up. This is ridiculous. Daniel ignored him. Ethan tried again. What exactly is going on here? Daniel finally looked at him, and his answer changed everything. This isn't about inheritance. Silence, complete silence, because inheritance was exactly what everyone assumed. Daniel continued, Your grandfather settled his estate years ago. That got everyone's attention, even mine. Years ago? What did that mean? The estate process happened after someone died, didn't it? Apparently not, at least not Walter Hayes. Daniel picked up my envelope, handed it to me, then gave Margaret hers. He kept the third. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody opened anything. Nobody breathed. Finally, Aunt Linda broke. What did Walter do? Her voice cracked. Just slightly. But enough. Enough for me to notice. Daniel looked at her carefully, then said something that made my heart start pounding. He prepared for something. What? Daniel's eyes moved around the room, across the folders, across the records, across the trust documents, across 20 years of secrets. Then he answered, Greed, nobody spoke. Not even Ethan. Daniel opened his own envelope, pulled out a folded letter, read silently for a moment, then looked up. His face had changed. Whatever was written there, he'd never seen it before. That surprised me. I thought he knew everything. Apparently he didn't. "Daniel?" I asked. He swallowed, then slowly nodded. I think Walter knew this family better than any of us. The room suddenly felt cold. Outside, the lake was completely dark now. The only light came from the boathouse ceiling, and for the first time all evening, I started realizing something. This wasn't a treasure hunt. It wasn't an inheritance game. It wasn't even about the trust. Those were distractions. Pieces, tools, the real purpose was something else, something Grandpa had been building toward for years. Then I opened my envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. "Nathan, if Daniel is standing beside you, then the test has officially begun." I stared at the page, then looked up. The test? Daniel's expression darkened. Because he already knew something I didn't, and judging by the look on his face, he wished he didn't. Then Aunt Linda suddenly gasped, a sharp intake of breath. Everyone turned toward her. She was staring at her own letter. Her face had gone pale, almost white. The paper trembled in her hands. I had never seen her look afraid before. Not once. And whatever she had just read terrified her. "Margaret?" She didn't answer. I stepped closer. "Aunt Linda?" Her eyes slowly lifted from the page, then landed on me, and what she said next made the entire room freeze. Walter knew. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. Knew what? Aunt Linda looked like she wanted to say something, then stopped, looked at Daniel, then back at the letter, like she was trying to decide whether to speak or keep a secret she'd been carrying for years. And in that moment, I realized Grandpa hadn't left behind a mystery. He'd left behind a reckoning. And somebody in this family had been hiding something for a very long time. The room didn't move. Nobody even breathed properly after that. Walter knew. Aunt Linda's voice was still stuck in the air like it didn't belong there. Daniel stepped closer. "Margaret, just read it out loud." She shook her head immediately. "No, that was it. One word." But it hit harder than anything else all night. Ethan finally laughed again, but it didn't sound confident this time. More like nervous noise. "This is insane," he said. "You guys are acting like this is some kind of sit-down." Daniel cut him off. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. And Ethan actually stopped. For the first time all weekend, he stopped. Aunt Linda looked at me. Really looked at me. Like she was seeing something she'd been avoiding for years. "I didn't think he would actually do it," she said quietly. My throat tightened. "Do what?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened the letter again. Her hands were shaking now. Small, uncontrollable movements. I thought it was just one of his ideas. Daniel exhaled slowly. "He documented everything. Margaret, you know that." She nodded. Slow, like it hurt. Then she finally read it. "I, Walter Hayes, confirm that the trust known as North Shore Legacy is not an inheritance structure." She stopped, swallowed hard, then continued. "It is a behavioral test designed over 20 years to determine intent versus entitlement within my own family." Silence again. But this time, it felt different, heavier, like the air itself changed. Ethan blinked. "What does that even mean?" Nobody answered him. Because I was already feeling it. That word again, entitlement, the same word Grandpa used in the garage. Aunt Linda kept reading. The beneficiaries were never selected based on bloodline priority. They were selected based on observation of character under repeated family pressure events. My stomach dropped. "Observation?" I whispered. Daniel nodded once. Every reunion, every gathering, every business meeting, every conflict, he looked at me. You were being watched. I went cold. You're saying this was staged? Aunt Linda closed her eyes. Yes, the word came out like it hurt. Ethan stood up. No, that's not possible. We didn't even know about any of this stuff. Daniel finally looked at him. That's the point. That shut him up. For real this time. Aunt Linda's voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. She looked at me, and I could see it now. Not anger, not confusion, something worse. Guilt. Deep, buried guilt. I told him things, she said softly. About you. About your life. About how you were doing. I thought it was just family conversation. My chest tightened. You were reporting on me? She flinched. I didn't know it was being used like this. Daniel stepped forward. Walter didn't leave wealth for comfort. He left it for exposure. He tapped the wooden box. Every person in this room has been measured against something they didn't even know existed. Ethan gave a short laugh. Measured how? Daniel looked at him. Control, greed, humiliation, power, then back at me. And restraint. That last word stayed. Restraint, everything came back at once. The parking lot, the jokes, the silence when I didn't fight back, the envelope, the key, the boathouse, my grandfather's words in the garage. Ownership versus entitlement. My hands felt cold. So what now? I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He opened his briefcase, pulled out one final document. This, he placed it on the desk. A single page. Official seal. Trust resolution. Then he said it. The test is complete. Nobody moved. The North Shore Legacy Trust is no longer an evaluation phase. He looked around the room, and for the first time, Ethan didn't look confident at all. Final designation has been assigned. My heart started beating faster. Assigned to who? Daniel turned the page toward me. I read the line, and my breath stopped. Sole successor designation, Nathan Hayes. The room didn't explode. It went silent, like sound itself had been taken away. Ethan whispered, "No." Aunt Linda covered her mouth. Daniel didn't react. He just watched me, like he was waiting for something. I looked up. I don't understand. Daniel nodded. I know. Then he added something quieter. You were never supposed to understand it quickly. My hands were shaking now. Why me? For the first time that night, Daniel actually smiled. Small, tired, like he'd been carrying this answer for years. Because you were the only one who never asked what you'd get. Silence, only the lake outside, moving gently against the shore. Ethan stepped back slowly, like the floor wasn't stable anymore. Aunt Linda sat down, hard, and I just stood there, looking at a piece of paper that apparently changed everything. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like something heavier, like responsibility I never asked for, like a door I didn't remember walking through had just closed behind me. Daniel closed his briefcase. Walter said one more thing, he added. I looked up. What? Daniel's voice softened. He said, if Nathan opens this envelope, don't congratulate him. A pause. Tell him he finally understands what it costs. I looked at the paper again, then the room, then the family that suddenly didn't know how to look at me anymore. And for the first time since I arrived at that reunion, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, completely, and I wasn't sure which one scared me more. And if there's one thing I learned that night, it's that sometimes the people who laugh at you the loudest are the ones who never saw the real story being written. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, you already know exactly how that feels. If you want more real-life style revenge and family drama stories like this, subscribe, because the next one hits even harder.